Welcome to Trendlines Over Headlines, the show where we break down this week's price action with some of the best traders and analysts in the world. We've got a good one for you today. McMillan will be joining us to share his thoughts on the markets. A lot of you might know him on Twitter as the Chart Life, but for those of you who don't, Ian is a technical analyst and a portfolio manager over at Adaptiv. Prior to working at Adaptiv, Ian actually helped me start the chart report, so he's a good friend, and I'm looking forward to hearing what he has to say about these markets. As a reminder, this is for educational purposes only, and nothing Ian or I say should be taken as financial advice. Anyways, it's Friday, the markets are closed, so before we talk to Ian, let's take a quick look at how this week played out. All right, so it was a shortened holiday week, but the S&P 500 rose about 2%. We closed right at resistance around 3,900, which is last week's high, as well as the May lows. So pretty important level there. If we can decisively break through it next week, we might have a chance at a sustainable rally, but we're still in a downtrend, and we're down about 19% from the highs, so it's tough to get overly bullish. Now, the Russell 2000 reclaimed its 2018-2020 highs this week, which was constructive. And you can see that nice little bullish RSI divergence there at the bottom, which suggests that sellers are losing momentum. So if we do get some upside next week, the next major resistance level is around 1900, which is about 7% higher from here in the Russell 2000. Now, sector performance was really interesting this week. Consumer discretionary, tech, and communications all led, which is notable because these have been the worst performing sectors year to date, and they're also the furthest from their 52-week high. So joining us to talk about all this and more is Ian McMillan. Ian, how you doing today?
Good. How you doing, Pat?
I'm doing well. Let's kick it off with the S&P 500. What are some of the levels that you're watching, both to the upside and the downside in the near term?
Short, intermediate term, I think we're kind of stuck in this range here. Really, I don't know if anything significant is going to happen unless we are either above probably like 4150. That's kind of the area we stalled out in May.
Yeah,
we had a range there and then broke down kind of the beginning of June. So if we get above that 4150 area, or obviously below the most recent close, not a good sign either. But as long as this rally lasts, and it could be great, especially for a lot of individual areas, but S&P in particular, for me to be a serious believer, not saying I'm not, participating, V bottoms happen, but 4150 would be the level where my eyes would perk up.
Yeah, kind of that first target, so to speak.
Yeah, if we get to that first target.
So I thought the sector performance has been kind of interesting recently. This is actually a 5-day performance of the sectors, and tech, consumer discretionary, and communications all led over the past 5 days, which is interesting because those guys have been the laggards year to date. So what do you make of that? On one hand, is it a trash-led rally? Because on the other hand, these are really important sectors. They have a combined weight of pretty much half the S&P 500, right?
Yeah. So tech obviously important. Again, it's still Apple and Microsoft. They're in downtrends, but they really have not, quote unquote, sold off themselves. There hasn't been a ton of technical damage there. Obviously, biotech continues to look well. Consumer discretionary, you mentioned, right? And a lot of that guy, like those small cap and mid cap retail names that have just been clobbered for the last year and a half. So to me, it's still, until proven otherwise, this is no different than, the other two rally attempts we've seen this year.
I see what you're saying. And it's really been kind of like a rebounding growth these past few weeks.
For sure, yeah, with energy getting hit.
Yep. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I guess a lot of that value weakness has been energy.
Energy,
But
banks haven't done anything. I mean, you
true.
think about without biotech doing what it's doing, you do wonder where the Russell would be. It's kind of the only thing in there.
Yeah, and you're like back to this key level. This growth value chart's been such an important one this whole year, and we're back to it. So I think these next few weeks will be really interesting. If we can get above those, that would
Yeah,
be
had
great for growth.
materials have gotten hit really hard on a relative basis, which has not helped the value story. Industrial is still not doing much on a relative basis. So yeah, it's very tough. And then you've got this, slow growth world. So, I guess people go back to the highest growing things. And well, I guess that's the reasoning. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't get
Well,
too
I mean,
involved in why people are buying what.
I think the scariest part about this chart is just seeing that kind of fail breakout that kind of occurred between 2019. I mean, we're
Hmm.
below that now. So, are we going to see a
Yeah.
continuation? Have these last 2 weeks just been a retest of that breakdown? That would be terrible for growth if that's the case, right?
Yeah. And yeah, you're below the .com highs. Uh, it would have been, even if this had consolidated for a couple years up here above this zone that you have,
Like
that
above the
I mean, I think a
2000
lot of
highs.
people would have been okay with that if we had maybe not the craziest, the strongest run that we've seen in stocks, but if we had a market, an S&P that was up 8 or 10% over the next couple of years, and there's this back and forth between growth and value, but everything's pretty stable. But this changes a lot of things. This opens up a lot of possibilities that I think most investors do not want opened.
Yeah. So let's move
Or
on to.
or now the flip side to that is that yes, this relationship moves down, but we're still in a bull market and value just outperforms.
Yeah.
It's just possible.
Right. We get new leaders kind of. Energy just leads for the next couple of years. That would be no
Yeah.
fun. So anyway, let's move on to healthcare because this sector has been getting a lot of buzz lately. So it's the only positive sector over the past month, and it's actually the closest to its 52-week high than any of the other S&P 500 sectors. And I heard Jeff
I
DeGraff
like that.
yesterday
Yeah.
on CNBC talking about the healthcare sector. And he brought up a really good point. He was mentioning that healthcare tends to be kind of this late cycle sector. You tend to see it outperform later in the business cycle. So,
Yeah,
so
I
do
would
you
agree
like
with that,
healthcare here?
particularly pharmaceuticals. You'll see pharmaceuticals, right? And it's kind of that last, so they're defensive, right?
Right,
Um,
right.
at least there's always this debate for me when healthcare gets labeled as growth or value or defensive, because I can take a lot of areas of healthcare and flop them into all three of those buckets. Um, Now, a lot of this has also been biotech,
Yeah,
which isn't the most defensive area. But no, I definitely agree that the last gasp to buy pharmaceuticals is a theme that has definitely played out before. And I even want to say 2018, don't hold me to this, but I want to say, you had pharma stocks really hanging out um, kind of closer to their highs up until late November, December. They kind of withheld a lot of that
yeah.
early Q4 sell off.
I like that you brought up kind of the debate over whether healthcare is defensive or not, because like you said, you have areas like biotech in there, which certainly don't seem defensive. But then you have healthcare providers and these
Yeah.
companies that,
And
no
they've
matter
been
how
great. I mean,
bad,
healthcare providers, your Humanas and your Cignas, and I actually haven't seen a lot of necessarily the medical devices names pop up on any of my scams.
which is
Uh,
surprising because
yeah, now
longer
that I
term,
think
those have
about
been.
that, I was gonna sit here and off the top of my head, could think of any devices or equipment names that came to that came to the forefront, but I can't. But yeah, and a lot of these therapeutics and biotechs and these small cap, I mean,
Yeah. But
stuff that
there are some
I try not
individual
to get
bio
involved in. What were you
there are
saying?
some there are some individual biotechs that are actually setting up for base breakouts. You have
There
like
are, they
Vertex,
are. I mean, there's definitely some attractive,
you have Halo, HALO,
and this makes
another one.
sense, right? So, a month ago when stocks or however, the 13th, the 14th, June 15th, whatever, the mid-June, when, stocks quote unquote bottom, well, for this short-term bottom. Those areas like ARC, like biotech, like solar, they never made new lows. And now
Yeah.
here we are 2-3 weeks later talking about how these are the names that are, the best performers and the ripping higher. So you could also argue the stage was set for some of this weeks ago. Now, who knows when it plays out? It took this 2 or 3 weeks for kind of build these bases that necessarily have a lot of V bottoms in these areas, but
Yeah, and if some of those levels that we talked about earlier don't hold on the major indices, then it's kind of all bets off, right?
yeah, and it's skeptical. I mean, I would have loved to have seen semiconductors hold up better, or transports. Biotech just really doesn't
Do it for you.
it doesn't really get it done for me.
Yeah. So let's talk about solar real quick. Another one of those
Yeah.
growthier areas that's kind of made a comeback recently. Or comeback might be too much of a word, but it's had a bounce. And this chart is the solar ETF relative to the energy sector XLE. And it broke above those former highs there. It's still in that downtrend that it's been in for almost 2 years now, a year and a half.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I wonder, a lot of this stuff, I wonder if we're in these downtrends, and yeah, do you get a few more weeks of this? And
I mean, this does
'cause we
happen
got
in
some good
downtrends, right?
seasonality
Where
coming
things
up.
bounce. Yeah.
Yeah. And we should have historically, another 4 or 6 weeks of good seasonal bullish trends. We were also supposed to kind of have some of that earlier in the year and it didn't pan out. So
Yeah, that's another really interesting point. I saw someone point out this week that this week is actually the second best week for the S&P 500 on average. So it kind of begs the question, was this recent strength just a product of seasonality? I mean, we'll never know, but it's definitely something to think about.
well, how about, I mean, you go back and think about, right? So the big three, so you had Santa Claus rally, I think ended up being bullish. I'm pretty sure Santa Claus rally ended up being bullish. But then you had the first 5 days of January?
Yeah, all those January seasonality
Yeah, they were
indicators.
all bearish.
Yep,
So
absolutely.
then you wonder, like, okay, are all the other seasonal trends going to be kicked this year? Which, I mean, no one knows. But
Right.
there was kind of that early, no one knows it was going to lead to 20-30% drawdowns in the S&P and NASDAQ, and it's a little bit of armchair Monday morning quarterbacking, but yeah, I mean, seasonality kind of hasn't really done what it's supposed to, even going back to the January stuff.
Yeah. No, that's an excellent point. But I mean, real quick, back to solar. There are
Mhm.
some names in there. I know you mentioned Enphase earlier.
Enphase, Jinko, right? Jinko,
Yeah,
yeah. So, and that's such a big, right? That didn't go anywhere for a decade,
yeah, it's got
or
that
even
base on
more.
base.
So, does this move higher? I mean, relatively speaking, if the market continues higher, yeah, you would expect solar. And you would expect this to probably, what is this kind of $80 up there?
It's around 75. You know what they say,
Okay, yeah.
75 gets you 100.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't
And
know
this
if you
has got
buy
the
into any of
China
that, but
theme, right? So
true.
China has been, it was an early bouncer as well, didn't make new lows, a lot of that K-Web stuff, a lot of those names. So that's kind of got a little double theme going on here. If you like the China relative strength, if you like the solar relative strength, certainly one way to play it.
I would agree. So real quick before you go, I want to finish up with Bitcoin.
Yeah.
You mentioned you were short and then quickly close that out. That's
Yeah.
the way. That's the way to do it. Take a quick paper cut and move on. And it was certainly worth the trade at the time, but we reclaimed that 20,000 level this week, 20,000 level. We're still below that 200-week moving average. But what's kind of your outlook?
Yeah. The weekly chart ended up looking pretty nice. I mean, there's nothing like I shorted it at basically 20,000, covered at 19, reshorted it, and then had to cover at 20. So net, was basically out flat. But the weekly chart, you're holding above these highs from 2017. You've got the 200-week moving average on there. I also think we're still below a VWAP from the COVID lows. Again, don't hold me to that. I don't have the chart in front of me, but I believe I saw that earlier today.
Yeah.
Right. It's a great risk reward area. That's the best way. I mean, below 20,000, you're probably going to 13, 12, 13. Above 20,000, that leaves the door open to probably like 30,000. You go back and test the underside of this channel.
Yeah, hung out at that 30,000 level for like a
But it
month.
hasn't done anything. I thought about getting long today, but I can't. I didn't, I need a break. I can't be long Bitcoin into the weekend. I get 2 days of no heartburn, so I got to save those.
Yeah. Well, Ian, thank you so much for coming on and
Yeah,
sharing your
thanks so much
thoughts
for
and
having me,
charts.
Pat.
Yeah, we'll have to do it again sometime.
For sure.
Have a great weekend.
All right, you do the same.
Thanks. Well, hey, thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to click like and subscribe, and we'll see you again next week.